Hello everybody, my name is KingStix. I am a challenger jungler and these are my 5 essential tips for climbing out of low elo. With these tips, I promise you that you will be able to consistently carry your teams, increase your rank, and climb out of low elo. I do highly recommend that you watch the whole thing through. That way you give it a chance to really cement itself in your mind, and I would highly recommend writing down a few notes on each tip in your own words. That way you can reference it and really build off of it and improve while playing on your own. At the end of the day, all I can do is show you the different aspects you need to improve on, but if you're not willing to actively think about those aspects while you're playing and try to improve, you won't improve, or at least not at the rate you want to. Before we jump into tip number 1, I have a pre-tip, and that is you need to be good. If you are just straight up crap, you need to practice and learn your champions. If you don't know what any of your abilities do, if you don't know where to go at any point in the game, these tips won't help you. So learn your champion, learn what your abilities do, and then you can go from there. If you want to improve at League of Legends but you really don't have that much time, I highly recommend that you only play one single champion. So I recommend picking a champion that isn't typically banned, staying away from things like Yasuo and Riven because of that reason. And I also recommend picking a champion that can be played in more than one role. For example, Fiddlesticks can be played as a jungle, mid, or support, or looking at Nautilus, he can be played as a support or mid laner. But if you do have enough time to play League of Legends, or if you can pick up a champion relatively quickly, I highly recommend you learn a minimum of 2 champions as a jungler, or ideally 3 champions. What you're looking for in these champions is a little bit of diversity. That way you don't end up crippling yourself and your team. In low elo especially, you're going to get lots of players who just pick a champion just because. Not because it's the right thing for your team or because it's their best character. More likely because they just bought a skin for that champion or because they watched someone play it on stream. This is why for your 2 champions, you're going to want an AP champion and an AD champion. As a jungler for right now, I would highly recommend Evelynn or Karthus as your AP jungler. And for your AD jungler, I would highly recommend picking up Kayn or Xin Zhao. Both of them are amazing right now. Once you have that down, I highly recommend learning a tank jungler. It is more important to have an AD and an AP champion before you pick up your tank jungler, because in low elo in general, it's easier to carry if you're playing a damage champion rather than a tank champion. Tank junglers are back in the meta. They're normally always good. You can choose between Sejuani, Nunu, or Rammus. All 3 are very good. I do highly recommend Rammus over the other 2 though, since he is easier to play and he's a lot more consistent, especially if you pick him against an all AD team. If you are new to the jungle, or if you are a lot more familiar with Amumu, he is also a reasonable option as a tank jungler. He's a lot stronger than he's been in a very long time. This information is valuable for champion select. Whenever you are in champ select, look up your team. All you have to do is copy and paste all at once in a big chunk, the lobby, and copy it into OPGG. You can get a really good idea of what your teammates are good at and what they normally play, even if you are first pick on your team. If your team is mostly AD, or if they play only mostly AD champions, you'd be better off first picking Evelynn or Karthus. If your teammates play mostly AP champions, then obviously pick an AD champion, whether that be Xin Zhao or Kayn. And if your team has absolutely no tank, especially if your team is low CC, I highly recommend picking a tank champion, which is why as a jungler, you should be able to play ideally 3 champions. I wouldn't recommend more than 3 because that will take away from your skill out of those 3 champions. You don't want to be the jack of all trades, master of nothing after all. Get as comfortable and confident on your 3 champions as possible. This will allow you to go into ranked games without being anxious or stressed out and let you play to your optimal level. Now that we have that pre-tip out of the way, if you follow those instructions before you play ranked, you are now ready for the 5 big old tips. Tip number 1, make sure you start on the right buff or the right camp. Different junglers have a different camp or a different buff that it's typically better for them to start on. For example, if you're playing a ranged jungler or a red buff level 2 jungler such as Kindred, Twitch, Xin Zhao, Jarvan, 90% of the time you're going to want to start on red buff. That way you can flex on the enemy jungler and allow yourself the option to gank early if that's what you want to do. Something else you should also keep in mind on your starting side is where is your bot lane. If you're a jungler that struggles with their HP early on, things like Rammus, Wukong, Elise, Jarvan, if you need that early leash, it is okay to start with your bot side, even if it is starting on blue buff. You don't want to get yourself too low on HP. It will set you up to die against the enemy jungler. It won't really let you contest scuttle crabs at the 3-minute 15-second mark, and it will also inhibit you from ganking before your first bat. So if you are a low sustained jungler that relies on a heavy early leash, just always start with your bot lane in that case. Big tip number 2 is a mistake that junglers make whether they're in iron or whether they're in diamond, which is getting a ward in the opposite side pixel brush. This is really important because vertical jungle still comes into play, especially when the enemy jungler picks an aggressive early game jungler such as Jarvan, Lee Sin, Xin Zhao, and Elise. When they pick champions like these, by vertical jungling, not only are they stealing your camps, but as you work your way over there, they will kill you. I understand in low elo this is kind of rare. You only really run into it if somebody's really good, if they're smurfing or getting boosted, but it is still an issue and it's something that you should start training for right now. You have two options. You can either ask one of your laners to ward it, very politely tell them to ward it at the 110 or 120-second mark, or you can ward it yourself. Ward it no later than the 1-minute 10-second mark, and you can walk all the way back to your opposite side buff. It's not important to ward the pixel brush on the side you're starting on, since you will be taking that buff and then moving on to your next side relatively quickly. It is only important to ward that pixel brush if for some reason you think they're going to do a late invade on you, but in low elo that's really not something you need to worry about, and just by watching for an invade you can really negate that altogether. And that leads us to big tip number 3. Never allow yourself to be peer pressured into a gank. You are the jungler, you decide. This has happened to literally everybody in every single elo, iron through challenger. There will always be a laner who loses lane, is begging like a baby for a gank because they got soloed and they're finding a way to make it your fault and trying to guilt you into doing something that you know is wrong. If they are spam pinging you, if they are begging in chat for a gank, you need to actually think, is it going to be a good gank? Do I have at least a 90% chance of killing the opponent? What is the chance they kill both of us and we don't even kill him? You need to think about what you're missing out on by going there. Are you missing out on a better gank? Are you missing out on your jungle pathing? Are you missing out on level 6? You need to look at the HP of the enemy laner compared to your laner. What if your laner is low on health and the enemy laner is full HP? He's probably going to kill both of you. You need to take all this into account. And now, just because your laner is begging for a gank, that doesn't mean that it won't be a good gank. That's why it's important that you look. If he's begging for it and you actually look and see the enemy laner is below half health, that could be a really good gank setup for you to get some shutdown gold and to also help get that laner back in the game. But in general, it really is best to avoid a losing lane, because if you do show up there, there's a chance that it'll just be a 1-for-1 at best. Worst case scenario, you'll both die, or the enemy jungler might even show up and it's 2v2, and since your laner's behind, it's going to be a bad time. Big tip number 4, once you establish your lead through your jungle pathing and through proper ganking, a really great way to take full advantage of this lead is to pay attention to the jungle camp spawns. Whenever a buff is showing gray, that means it's going to spawn in a minute or less. Whenever it shows as yellow on the minimap, that means it is 20 seconds or less away from spawning in. Once you have built up your lead, you want to show up at these spots 5 to 6 seconds before it spawns in, or 5 seconds at the latest once it does spawn in. That way you can kill the enemy jungler and take their buff at the same time. If this is in low elo, oftentimes the enemy junglers will show up at their buffs very late. In those situations, just ward the bush out in front of you, drag the buff into the bush it's closest to, and take it. At that point, if you see the enemy jungler somewhere else on the map, you can recall, gank, or keep farming their jungle. If you don't see them anywhere on the mini-map, you can wait somewhere up to around 20 or 30 seconds. If they don't show up, then you're usually best to just recall. This is one of my favorite ways to help build a lead, because not only are you getting lots of gold and guaranteed experience off of this, you are putting the enemy jungler that much farther behind, which is amazing. because they can't contest you at dragons, scuttle crabs, and if you go to gank a lane, if they come to counter gank, since you're ahead, you'll have a huge advantage. Depending on the jungle matchup or depending on the gold differential, this tip doesn't always apply, but whenever it does apply when you're ahead or because of the jungle matchup, I highly recommend you use it to build up some easy leads and snowball your games. If you refuse to ever go in the enemy's jungle, even when you are ahead, you're always going to stay a hard stuck 50% win rate jungler and you'll have trouble climbing. When you have leads, you have to build off of those and push those leads. And in my experience, the best way to build that lead is by showing up at the enemy's buff spawn, whether it be red buff or blue buff, killing them and taking the buff once they start it. That way they waste some abilities and it will be easy to kill them. Big tip number 5 is with the late game. As a jungler, your job in the late game isn't to force plays, it's to watch the map and make the best decision off of what the situation is. If you guys are ahead, your best bet is to get a pick and then do Baron. Even if you are ahead, I highly recommend against starting Baron or Elder Dragon. If all 5 of the enemies are alive, the jungler might flash in and steal it. The enemies might do something really tricky. So always try to get a pick before you start a major objective. If the other 4 enemies do show up to try to fight you, you guys can just turn around, fight at 5v4. Even if you are low on health, you should be able to win it. It's really easy to get baited in by your teammates onto a bad Baron call. As a jungler, it is your responsibility to walk away. You're the adult here. Your teammates are going to make loads of dumb decisions, and when they ping Baron and they walk to it to attack it, it's your job to ping them no and to walk away. If you do not walk away, you're just as bad as they are and you're setting up a massive Baron throw. So until you get that pick, or unless you know where all of the enemy champions are, I wouldn't recommend starting a Baron. Instead, shove a wave or wait for a pick. And a little bonus tip I want to give you guys is stop farming the jungle, especially in the mid and late game. You don't have to literally stop farming the jungle, but whenever you get a kill, multiple kills, you don't need to go and farm your own jungle. At the very least, go take the enemy's jungle. That way you put them behind on gold. But you should be taking dragons, turrets, inhibitors, and other objectives whenever you get a kill. It shouldn't just be mindlessly going back into your jungle and farming. Even if it's early game, you get a gank off on bot lane, you kill the bot laners, stay and get a few hits in on the turret before you back off to base or back off to farm. Never just get a kill and then just go farm jungle camps. That is how you play for 40 to 50 minute games, and those just turn into coin flips. And those are my 5 essential tips for climbing and escaping low elo as a jungler. I hope you wrote down a few notes. That way whenever you are practicing in normal draft, or if you are practicing in rank, you can look at this, which should allow you to focus on which aspects are really important and that are gonna allow you to consistently carry your games. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button, comment for the algorithm, and subscribe. It really does help out the channel quite a bit. My name is KingStix, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.